The fact that people should realize about those who experienced war, I mean, have really experienced combat. The war never really ends for these people. And that was the case of for Bill and I. But we both made the conscious decision when we got dismissed from the Army, and in my case, dismissed directly from the Army hospital in San Antonio, even though I was still in a cast and on crutches. I was not healed. We both made the conscious decision to try to put the war behind us and go on with our lives. And some people are not successful in doing this. The war is such a defining, intense experience that they cannot put it aside. But Bill and I were more or less capable or successful at suppressing the war. I'm not saying we didn't forget it, but we suppressed it. At a certain point, the war comes back and it becomes insistent. And there is this overwhelming need to, in some meaningful way, come to terms with what was the most intense experience of our lives. I'm a member of the medevac Association. We have annual conventions, and by the luck of the draw, on the 50th anniversary of my wounding in Vietnam, we had a reunion of the first Air Cav medevac in San Antonio, Texas, and 4 of the 5 crew members who were on the mission where I was wounded, and where the gunner was wounded as well, and where we nearly crashed in a fiery crash on top of the very soldiers we were trying to save, that were there. And that was the first time we had seen each other in 50 years. And Commander Greg Simpson, retired now Colonel, he became very emotional because he said, I never knew what happened to you. You were wounded severely and medevac, and I never got word whether your leg was amputated or whether, or whether you even survived. I forget the exact number, 5 days to go, but I was actually not supposed to be flying. Right. The last 2 weeks, that was at least in the first Air Cav, they suspended you or gave you a pass on combat missions, our first stop, as we called it. you could do backhauling, but not combat missions. And so this was an all-volunteer mission, by the way. It was an ad hoc crew we had to put together for this mission post.
Yeah, I think you were doing something, and another soldier came and said, "Hey, the medic who's supposed to be on this flight's doing something else. We need a medic. Can you come?"
Yeah, medic
And-
Burkhart was his name, and he had come down with some kind of a fever of undetermined origin. We called it FUO, and was it, was over in the aid station, sick as he could be, and so they needed a medic. And I think they might I don't recall if some of the other crew were also. So I wasn't even in uniform. I flew this mission in blue jeans.
You did.
Wow. And it just so happened that I was sitting on a bunker listening to Janis Joplin on my cassette recorder when the word came down that they needed a medic.
You flew this mission in your blue jeans and a t-shirt or something?
Well, actually, I did have my regular Nomex blouse on, but only because I didn't have a civilian shirt. I did have some blue jeans around, and I didn't have I don't think I had my boots on. Maybe I did. Yeah, I did have my boots on. Yeah.
Let me ask you this: why did you accept the mission? Why not just say, "Hey, I've got a week to go. I'm done. I'm not going back out"?
There was no question, but I accepted, as any of my other medics would have done. You just don't. I mean, there's no. I never crossed my mind not to do it. You see, and that's hard to explain. But I mean, it is this. We had an intense camaraderie. The mission statement of medevac, so that others may live, was a mission statement wholly consistent with my beliefs. It was a mission statement that we all shared. And we were there in the midst of death to promote life. So I grabbed my aid bag and the cassette recorder and a fresh tape, and I started it going. And the whole idea was, well, my DROS is a week away, and I want, people back in the world, as we called it, to be able to have some sense of what I was doing. And that's why I recorded as DROS was approaching. I said, I'm going to make some tapes of these, and then people will understand what I'm doing.
I'm hearing you saying, maybe I'll live, maybe I die. If I die, tell my parents I love them. And as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, okay, because I know the story because I've read it. This medevac helo has come under fire. The helo itself is damaged pretty significantly, and if the pilot doesn't get it to the ground pretty quickly, it might crash. It will.
Now, the hero of this mission was Greg Simpson, who was the commanding officer, and he should have been the Peter pilot. He was not the ranking officer, but they switched off. And he was one who set the tone of calm. And if he hadn't aborted that mission, and he did, I wouldn't be here. None of us would be, and the soldiers on the ground would not be here because we'd come down right on top of it, a fiery ball of flame. And so for me, he's the real hero. Now, it's true, I sound flippant even. And I regret having said that, by the way. It sounds silly, but you have to understand, I've been in this intense situation. I got where we came under point blank machine gun fire. I'm talking about an Old West shootout at 100 feet or so with machine guns. And I can see these bullets going by me. People don't believe that, but I could see the lines of the bullets going. I mean, we took 20 rounds in the helicopter. A couple of bursts of machine gun fire at point blank range. And I stopped 3 of those bullets or at least 3 of them went through me, 3 separate bullets. We're in triple canopy jungle. We made our way down through the stove, clipping limbs at either side, and a feat that only the best pilots could perform because they're talked down. They can't see. They have to be talked down by the door gunner and the crew chief. 2 feet to the right, Dave, you're clipping limbs, back a foot, all the way down. And then we hover, and they're in a firefight underneath us, and we have a ringside seat, and the Americans are huddled behind a big log, and the NVA are in a bunker. The hot hoist is the most dangerous maneuver you can perform as a medevac because you are 100% vulnerable.
You're right there in the doorway.
You cannot take off to the right or the left. You can only go back out the stovepipe that you came down through, and they can continue to fire at you. So I've already thrown out a special hoist. They're strapping, and they begin strapping him in, and I'm running this hook down with on the end of a jungle penetrator, and that's when we came under fire. I mean, and then they opened up too, so it's like you can hear the machine guns chattering, and it's both sides. And then in the first air cab, we were armed, so we have a door gunner too, and that's Dave, Dave, and he opens up. Mm-hmm. So it's an old West shootout, point blank range with machine guns. So one round comes up through, and now I'm talking about not an AK-47, but their equivalent 30 caliber machine. It comes up through the floor of the helicopter, and I'm kneeling. It goes in the top of my foot, goes all the way through my foot, and embeds in the sole of my boot. And I still have that bullet. If it had not expended 90% of its energy going through the floor of the helicopter, it would have blown my foot off. And then another round gave me a flesh wound in my arm right here. And I mean, I can see these things going by. And another one then opened up my right thigh from my knee all the way to my hip, and but missed the bones. But it left like a 2-inch, cut in my thigh from my knee all the way to my hip. And but I'm a medic at this time, and when Dave gets us out and we're up in the air, I didn't realize how precarious the helicopter was because all the oil is running out of the transmission, the gauges are going crazy. And there is a chance that we will drop like a rock out of the sky. And Dave they are monitoring the gauges and trying and praying that I was not aware that we were in such a precarious situation. So I'm ecstatic. I'm a medic. I know no arteries have been clipped. I don't care if a bone's been shot out of my foot. I'm not going to die from that. I can see that I'm not bleeding, badly anywhere in it. So I know I'm going to survive. We flew first up, second up, and third up. And so first up, you were on call for actually, evacuating people from firefights. And second up, you supported first up. And third up, you did backhauls. You went to forward fire support bases, and you hauled people who were wounded and been stabilized back to the surgical hospital in Saigon or wherever, And so we were flying third up, backhauling. And we went out to a place north of Phuc Vin, somewhere close to the Cambodian border. And they loaded several people on, they brought them on stretchers, and we could hang these stretchers, suspend them with straps crosswise in the bay of the helicopter. So they had a whole load of people, and we were full up. And this guy is on the top tier in a stretcher, and he had OD'd on drugs, they said. And so he's on this stretcher, and he's He's passed out. He's not moving or talking. He's alive, but he's just OD. And so he's not in any way strapped into the stretcher. And he's up in the top tier. And so we take off and going, and I noticed that at one point he raises his head and there's a strap blowing in the wind, and all of a sudden he yells, "Snake!" And he jumps out of the litter and attacks me. And we're not in any way tied into it. I mean, the doors are open,
and you're not belted in.
6 feet,
Yeah.
whatever the distance is between the doors in a Huey, and he tries to throw me out of the helicopter. And he's a big, powerful guy, and I grab a hold of the pilot's seat, because I usually sit on the floor with my back to the pilot of the Peter pilot's seat. And I grab hold and he's trying to throw me out, but luckily my gunner is a big old, Dave is a big burly guy, and he comes to my rescue and he cold cocks the guy and knocks him out. And so we take all the tape we have and we tape him to the litter like a mummy, so he can't move, till we get back to the base. So it's kind of a funny story,
In retrospect,
but yet the thought of it, of being all of a sudden, I get acrophobia when I think about being flung from a helicopter and what that would be like. And that did reappear many times in my dreams. That was a recurring nightmare. So we're flying, we're back home. We got an urgent call from, I believe it was Song Bay. And it's monsoon season. So the rain is just coming down. And so we close up the helicopter and we're flying, and the pilot said, I think we're there. 100% instance. I think we're there. Hit the lights. He told his Peter pilot, hit the lights. They have these powerful floodlights on these helicopters. And he hit that light. All that rain was going sideways. That's all you could see. And everybody got vertigo in the helicopter, just like that. Got vertigo. And they started screaming and hollering, and the helicopter went into a death dive. And luckily the Peter pilot snapped out of it just in a minute and got right at us. But I remember looking at that ball in the helicopter right there, and it says the ball, a navigation that shows you amber and pitch and all that sort of thing. And I could not read it. I could not, with vertigo, I could not make heads or tails. I couldn't tell up from down. That was a harrowing experience, believe me. And I had nightmares about that too.
You were drafted, but you were also a conscientious objector. And so that's, that puts you into a fairly small class. I think, not fairly, and actually a small class of Americans who objected to the war and served.
Yes.
Didn't object and go to Sweden or Canada or, game the system and stay out. You were drafted. You went to Vietnam and as a non-combatant medic. So I guess the first question here is, what was it about the war that that led you to the position of taking a very firm position that you did not want to be engaged in combat? Because you say in your memoir that you're not a pacifist, that there was something about this war that you objected to very much. What was that?
As an aspiring historian, I decided to educate myself, and I began reading extensively about the situation in Vietnam. This led me by degrees to think that the war was fundamentally a mistake and was wrong. And the two books that influenced me were Fulbright's The Arrogance of Power, and the other book by Edwin Reischauer, Beyond Vietnam. And those books by two not only prominent politicians and public figures, but respected scholars influenced me deeply. And I was also influenced by the writings of an English philosopher, eccentric philosopher, Bertrand Russell, especially the little book, His Man of Future, about the perils of nuclear war. And I was deeply affected by that. And these things affected me deeply, you know, and but just to put it in context, what I saw was that the whole rationale, the whole domino theory, the whole idea that we're fighting communism was incorrect. The real forces that were shaping the war after World War II were nationalism and the resolve on former colonies not to be recolonized. And you know, of all the leaders of the Allies in World War II, only Roosevelt realized that we could not go back to the world as it was before the war. Churchill wanted to reestablish colonialism in India. De Gaulle wanted to reestablish colonialism in Indochina. And these people were not about to welcome back their former overlords with open hands. They were, in their eyes, patriots fighting in the first instance to free their country from colonialism. So the American war was an extension of the French war to reestablish colonialism. It's just that simple. So I became, you know, I just decided at some point I cannot participate in this war as a combat. But yet I'm torn by a sense of duty. I was raised that way in a very conservative rural background. I did not want to shirk my duty. I refused to game the system like a lot of politicians who shall remain unnamed did. You know, I didn't try to, you know, drink 10 gallons of coffee before I went in for my deal or pay a doctor to say I had bone spurs. You know, I was willing to serve. You know, I believe in paying your debts. Both Bill and I came to this decision that we were willing to serve as long as we could do so without weapons training and weapons. And that is a common denominator to all 1AOs, you see. They're willing to serve. And it's a compromise. We made a bargain, and you know, I'm not a saint. The real conscientious objectors, the 1Os, who were the great majority, like the Amish and the Mennonites and the Quakers and these people, they refused to put a uniform on. And they some of them, you know, they look at us and say, well, you contributed to the war. Well, their criticism is just, we did. But we made a bargain that we could live with in our own minds. It was a compromise. And by and large, the Army lived up to their side of the bargain. And so we tried to live up to our side of the bargain and be good medics. The people I do take seriously when they make this charge that you were actually supporting the war, when that comes from COs as opposed to 1AOs, I mean, I'm talking about the conscientious objectors who refuse, who would rather go to jail than put on the uniform. Yeah, I say, well, you're right. That's all I can say. You're right. We did contribute to the war. But I often think about our esteemed Texan Lyndon Baines Johnson. Yeah, in a little saying he had. He wasn't quite a politician, you know, what you think about him, but he said, it's always better to be on the inside pissing out than the outside pissing in. And that kind of encapsulates it, you know, even without, when we're in the Vietnam, And people know we're conscientious objectors. We're not buttonholing people and trying to get them to be subversive. We've made a bargain with the Army, and we're living up to our side. We're not trying to undermine the war effort, but just the example, the fact and presence, reality of our example is speaking louder than those on the outside. You see, we have our example probably has affected more people in a meaningful way than those who are on the outside. I landed at Conscientious, and which is on one side of Saigon, and then I was being transported to Long Binh, which is a big Army base, and so we had to drive through parts of Saigon in this bus, and just the incredible energy of the streets, of all the street vendors and all the mopeds and all these women, with their national, those cone-shaped hats and their aldies, those kind of pajama-like pants and things they wore, but just the incredible energy of the street life. And then once we got out of Saigon, the beauty of the countryside, the rice fields, but also the redness of the soil, which all the areas I was in, you had this ubiquitous red soil that dyed everything, dyed your uniforms. But then my next big impression is that Conscientious was this enormous, huge base camp, and it began to dawn on me the way that I hadn't before. A war is about logistics and supporting the people in the field. Almost in the first instance, it's a question of logistics. And I didn't realize that only somewhere between 10 and 20% of those who went to Vietnam were actually out in the field doing the fighting and dying. And the rest were ensconced in these huge base camps, where all the materiel came in, and all the, motor pools, and all that, the stuff, repair shops and depots were located. But they had this long pile of junk vehicles that stretched a mile long. And it was, 100, 200, 150 feet high, of wrecked trucks, jeeps, helicopters, planes, you name it.
Wow.
And it just, the enormous material waste of war. Well, that made a big impression on me because I'm a country boy. I grew up on a family ranch, and we scrapped for every piece of equipment we had, every tractor, and we took care of all this stuff. And to see all this material just so rudely discarded, it brought home the material cost of war. But, war is waste. War is not only material waste, it's human waste, and it's ecological waste. We were opposed to the war before we went over there, and everything we saw and experienced reinforced our belief system, didn't contradict it or cause us to have to go back and see. And so my first impressions were the waste of war. Every war develops its own language, but we didn't refer to people as being killed in Vietnam. We said they were wasted. He got wasted, and it's a waste of resources, and it's an ecological disaster as well. The ecological cost it imposes on a country like Vietnam, which had a greater number of bombs dropped on it than Germany in World War II, a much smaller country. You could see that from the air. My gosh, all the bomb craters were like smallpox on the country. Agent Orange, it goes on and on and on. We rolled into Cambodia. I was out of, they built a huge fire support base called Tin Yon, right on the border, the Parrots Peak. to launch this invasion into Cambodia. And once again, it was first and foremost a logistics issue. It was in a complete mess. All these trying to support this with only 6 weeks' notice to get all the material in place. They had this huge place, and so my job was to be the medic on convoys that went in and out of Cambodia every day. We hauled material in for our 2nd and 27th, and then we hauled captured uniforms and rice and whatever we could find back out. And so we made that run every day, and we went through about 14 kilometers of triple canopy jungle, and then it opened up into this like Shangri-La landscape of Cambodia with these not so much rice but pineapple fields, and these beautiful monasteries in the background with monks in their yellow robes, and all their houses are built on stilts, but they're made out of teak and mahogany. I mean, the beautiful woods and very aesthetically incredibly pleasing. And when we were there, going down these old French Indochina roads that were built during, when they were also part of French Indochina, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And they were lined with some kind of tree that had incredible red flowers. And then these pineapple fields, and then these houses up built on stilts that out of incredibly beautiful wood, and the peaceful nature as a juxtaposition with the war-torn landscape of Vietnam. It was like a Shangri-La next to a living hell, And then, so that was an overwhelming impression of the beauty of this place. They made the strategic decision not to stand and fight in Cambodia. There were no pitched battles, you see. They retreated and gave up all their supply warehouses. However, they left screening forces behind, whose job was to attack the convoys and the logistics. And it was a bloody shooting match. It was every day. We were hit with RPGs, command control mines. I mean, it was a nightmare. And we lost trucks every trip we made in. You never knew which one would get it. But it's like you can't just dissipate all these stressors that are on you every day as fast as they're accumulating. You see. And at a certain point, you get what was then called shell shock at one time, in which we now call PTSD. You go nuts. Your body, this constant stress causes you to start shaking. They call it the shakes, and having nightmares. I was getting to that point, so I was there nearly 3 weeks. I think I don't really know how long I was there, but every day. Somebody was getting it. Well, the truck behind me hit the mine and blew up. And there's, you can't describe what one of these mines does to a Doosan. It leaves nothing but the frame.
I'm sure you've been asked this question many times before. Was there any point during your, I think, 14 months in country when the thought went through your head that maybe you should go ahead and reach for that M16, maybe you should go ahead and reach for that other weapon, or did that not ever happen at all?
Well, it's kind of funny. I'm a stubborn guy, and we were all tested at one time or next. I hasten to add, I say this over and over again, we made a bargain with the Army, and by and large, the Army lived up to their. See, we were a known quantity because the 1AO classification was introduced in World War II. So a lot of the old lifers, the first sergeants and staff sergeants who, in my opinion, ran the Army, many of whom were veterans of World War II in Korea. they had experience with us, and in many cases, they actually requested us because we were not only conscientious objectors, we were conscientious medics. And by and large, we had more education than our fellow medics who were right out of high school. You see, most of us had college degrees. And so we were more trainable, if you will. I mean, are used to being trained. We knew how to be trained, and but we had this common ethos that we are conscientious medics, and but we were all tested. So, having said that, every one AO I talked to, we like to sit around and tell, "How were you tested?" And so I tell the story of being assigned to guard duty. And you know, and having to sit in a bunker all night, and the sergeant in charge said, "Well, here's an M16." You know, I said, "No, thank you," because I'm stubborn. So I sat there all night, peering out into the wire for sappers, which had periodically infiltrated the base. And I'm thinking, okay, if I see one, what do I do? Do I invite him in for tea? Or I say, please attack the next bunker down because they're armored. You know, I don't know what I would have done. But I refused to pick up that M16 just because I'm stubborn. And I knew he was having fun with me. And by God, he wasn't going to, you know, get the benefit of it. So that's one example. Another example is from a guy I went through basic training with, Red Irwin. He said he was a medic in an aid station, and they were treated wounded NVA. And they had a guard in there with an M16. And he said something like, "Oh, I got to go do something," you know, and he handed in the M16 in his lap, and he took off, you know. So there he is, a medic in a room full of NVA with an M16. And this is a guy who's never fired a weapon in his life. He didn't even know how to chamber around, you know. So he said, "I just sat there with the thing in my lap. I didn't know, I couldn't have used it if I wanted to, because I didn't know the first thing about it." So that's another example of how we were, you know, this guy's obviously, you know, playing with him, testing him. My first assignment was with an artillery battery out in the field on Thunder Road between Lai K and St. Ann. And it was the practice then that the medic stayed with the commanding officer, the captain. And my captain was regular Army. That's a big deal. Were you a shake and bake, or were you a regular Army? He's gung-ho regular Army trying to make his reputation. And he didn't like me being a conscientious objector. And he tried to engage me in conversation, questioning my beliefs and demanding that I explain to him why my belief system. And at first I kind of said a few things, and then he began to bug me. And so I turned to him and I said, "Captain," I won't give his name, but Captain W, I'm a 1A, you know, and I have a legal right, and you have no legal right to question me, and I'm not going to answer one more of your questions. And he realized, you know, he'd been called out, and he knew the score. He was out of line. But I no longer had the pleasure of staying in the safest bunker on the artillery base. I had to sleep out, find my own hole in the ground to sleep at night, where it was full of mud and rats and filthy. But I was much happier in my own little bunker, hole in the ground, than with the captain's well outfitted, comfortable bunker.
So you referred to your two strongest memories in your 2-week stint in the hospital at Cu Chi. And I'll just read what you write about one of them. So he referred to an officer awakening from anesthesia to realize he had lost both legs and one arm from a mine he had stepped on. Now, I'm assuming that as I read those words to you, which are just words to me, that you can bring that back to your mind's eye, and you can
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very traumatic experience just to see something like this. And and you realize in this case, this particular officer, you can tell, you have an idea right away whether they're regular Army, shake and bakes, as we call them, ROTC people. And as I was told later that he was, regular Army, he was trying to make his career in the Army. And so the whole, all these people assume that they will emerge from the war with medals and then go on to a career. So, I mean, just his whole worldview when he wakes up is completely turned upside down, and it's shocking. But it's also, I mean, it's of course very traumatic for him, but it's also traumatic to see somebody with that kind of complete turnover in their world. From now on, I'm going to be a cripple the rest of my life. My Army career is out the window. What am I going to do? And to see him sort of weeping. I mean, it's a very searing memory that I'll carry, and also watching a young soldier die, watching the moment of death on several occasions. In this case, the one that really sticks in my mind is the young soldier who died well, he had an infection, spinal meningitis. He caught, a lot of people died in Vietnam, not of the enemy, but of disease and friendly fire and that sort of thing. But he died of spinal meningitis, and I watched him in the moment of death. And that's a deep memory. I saw quite a few people die, but for some reason that particular death sticks out. We underscore over and over again that we were not a threat to the Army, that we had made a bargain and we intended, I'm not talking about personally, but as a class, 1AOs, this is a common denominator. We were good medics and not a threat to the Army. But the Army didn't see it that way. And they were absolutely paranoid about this, quote, new breed of conscientious objector who is more political than religious in his beliefs. They thought we, the Seventh-day Adventists and people, they were like a curiosity, or, they were a wart on your nose, but we were a cancer in their eyes that could metastasize and create, undermine morale. That's how they saw us, and they were very suspicious of us. And this came to a head in an episode at Cu Chi where I was arrested by the MPs and interrogated by military police because there had been outbreaks of vandalism and graffiti, and there'd even been a fragging on the base. And so there was obviously some sort of organized anti-war sentiment brewing on the base, and they suspected that I was involved in that. And I was able to demonstrate to them that I had, by saying, look, no, and explaining to them exactly what I'm explaining to you, that I am not in any way connected with subversive organizations. I'm not communicating with them. I'm not spreading literature. I am not involved in this. I made a bargain. You guys have lived up to your side by and large. I'm going to live up to my side. And apparently I convinced them because I never heard another word. Everybody in Vietnam had to decide for themselves how they were going to deal with it. And Bill and I are not self-righteous. This was our this was our solution, our compromise to that fundamental dilemma. And we do not criticize those who came to a different decision, that they decided, that they supported our government, that it was their duty to fight and wholeheartedly and do their best to be good soldiers. We have no criticism of these people. I mean, everybody had to decide for themselves as long as they made a conscientious effort to confront the dilemma. We can't criticize them. And so we just want them to show the same tolerance toward us.
I'm sure there in Texas, when you're at the store or out in town, you'll see the Vietnam vets with their, their caps on. It says Vietnam vet there. And when you see those vets, you were in the war, some of those guys, as you say, a lot of them are in the rear echelon. Some saw experienced horrific combat. You saw a little bit of both. What's your disposition toward them? I think most people would assume that, conscientious objector, and so he would have, he would feel alienated from the vets who weren't conscientious objectors. But I'm sensing from you that's not really the case.
Yeah, well,
what is your disposition towards those vets you see?
It's schizophrenic. I mean, I do not. I have no animosity toward them. I understand, and the commonality of our shared experience outweighs these divisions. So I do not have negative feelings about them. But there is that element that, it can't be 100% shared experience, because, my experience of the war was different in ways that you probably cannot understand, but, we'll just accept each other at face value without criticism.
You are kind of those 14 months you're in Vietnam, you are kind of a living paradox. The conscientious objector who is, in your work as a medic, participating in this disaster and trying to bear witness to something while you're there. A very different paradox that I've heard a lot from veterans, and I'm sure you've heard a lot too, and I'm just interested in your own experience. And I'm thinking now of the combat vets. They'll talk about the terribleness of war, the toll it takes on them at the time, the toll obviously it takes on the fellow soldiers who don't make it, the families of those soldiers, the toll it takes on those soldiers, like the one that you saw, who lost his limbs, the toll that it continues to take on a combat veteran through life. They'll say all of that, and they will also say that there's something about the world of war, that for all of its horribleness, there's something about it that they miss.
Yes, it's, for most people, a wartime experience is the most intense experience of their life. And intense experiences can be addictive. It's almost like a narcotic. And once you're withdrawn from that, you have withdrawal symptoms. Nothing else in your life, even things like marriage and the birth of your children, is not as intense as the experience of war. And so there's a kind of nostalgia for that, and the emotions associated with it. And you forget the dangers, and you think about these bonds that were forged in war. To me, that's one of these things that's difficult to explain, but for most veterans, they understand it intuitively. You don't have to explain that to another veteran. You say that's something most of them experience, not all. Some people just, with nothing but a negative experience, and they don't want to revisit it in any way. But certainly for me, the war was not all bad. And I have fond memories of some of it, and especially the camaraderie of my fellow medics and pilots and crew members in the first Air Cav medevac. There is one thing that one question that I might mention that I found difficult to answer. You know, people know I give talks. I get invited to give talks about my book. And invariably, there's somebody in the audience who has lost a family member. You know, a brother, a son, whatever. And they know that I was opposed to the war. So what do I say to the parents, brothers, sisters of those who've lost loved ones? Loved ones are whose family members have suffered lifelong injuries. I say, well, it was all a waste. You know, just buck up to it. It was a big waste. And I wrestled with this question myself for many years, but I found the answer actually in a poem by Michael O'Donnell. He was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. He started to follow the trajectory. He had been motivated by, you know, patriotism to volunteer and then to become a pilot, a helicopter pilot. And then he became very disenchanted with the war. But he was also a poet, and he wrote poems before he was killed, with not a lot of time left in his DROS. So there are certain parallels, you know. But he wrote a poem called "In That Time," and you know, I can quote it by memory, but I won't. But basically, it says, even though the war was crazy, do not forget these gentle heroes. So that's my answer to the question.